Backstage news following Impact Wrestling's No Surrender event this past weekend. 2 betrayals in one night. All this and more in today's Impact Wrestling news. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is plenty of news stories to get into today. So we're going to talk about No Surrender this past weekend. Now, of course, there is Impact Wrestling television tapings that have been happening Sunday and today. We're going to be talking about those tomorrow and throughout the week. So we've got all of the Impact Wrestling news covered. We've also got, obviously, a lot of backstage details following No Surrender that we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about the ramifications of what has happened at No Surrender, at the upcoming television tapings as well. So this is, if you're a fan of Impact Wrestling, this is the time to subscribe to the channel because there's plenty going on. So let's talk about No Surrender. Let's talk about some of the backstage news, some of the notes coming out of the show. Then we'll get into some of the big key and newsworthy events that happened at No Surrender. Now, after this weekend's No Surrender event, the company heads to the Alario Center in New Orleans to tape new episodes as well as of Impact Wrestling on Access TV, as well as content for Before the Impact. As I mentioned, they've taped that on Sunday and they're going to be taping it today. So we're going to have those over the course of the next couple of days. But a report from PW Insider indicates that backstage morale in Impact Wrestling is very high following this weekend's event. The overall feeling was that the talent put on a great showcasing from top to bottom, which I would agree with, even though that I had some honestly, the weather here in the UK has been terrible the last couple of the last week or so, and just the situation when it comes to internet and streaming has been certainly difficult, put it that way. So hence why the watch long just died at the weekend. Nevertheless, I was able to watch it the following day, and I certainly do agree with the backstage morale in Impact Wrestling is that I thought the show was very, very good, and I thought they did put on a great showcasing from top to bottom. I thought it featured several newsworthy and noteworthy events. I thought it featured some great matches, whether it was the World Championship match, whether it was, of course, the main event, the Hardcore War. Enjoyed that as well. Now, during the show, Scott D'Amore came out to the crowd and cut a promo about Matt Cardona versus Jordan Grace for the Digital Media Championship. He explained to the crowd that since Cardona screwed them out of a proper finish, the fans could claim a free ticket to the taping the following day. If they had a ticket already, they could get a voucher for discounted merchandise for the taping instead. So a lot of the people that attended No Surrender also attended the television tapings too. We're going to talk about the Jay White situation. We're going to talk about the Bullet Club. But yeah, overall, really enjoyed the show. And I think this just goes to show, I've seen obviously quite a few news articles, and I've seen quite a few people talking about Impact Wrestling on social media following the event at the weekend. And it's always very funny, isn't it? Because you see people go, man, that was a good show, and that featured some good matches. And I really was surprised by the Jay White situation. I was really surprised by 2 big men facing off for the World Championship, and yet it was a really good match. Or I was really surprised by, even in the opening kickoff show, the Trey Miguel match, simple match, but fun to watch. I was really surprised by whatever. It was just a good show, and that's the thing with Impact Wrestling, isn't it? Is that they have been delivering, a good show, a steady show. It's not always perfect, but they've been delivering a good show for a while now. And I always find it fascinating when people do eventually check it out and they go, man, I enjoyed that, because it is. They've been doing good stuff. Impact Wrestling's biggest issue has never been in-ring. It was never been the in-ring product. It's never been the quality of their matches or the quality of their shows. Maybe production, they could improve that somewhat, but they do a different kind of show to what you see when it comes to WWE or AEW. Yes, it's got a smaller crowd, but you run these very small buildings. It's got an enclosed atmosphere. It's certainly different to other things that are out there right now, and I think it's such an interesting time in the pro wrestling industry. You've got WWE, which, for better or for worse, when it comes to their product maybe not being great or the booking not being great, they're making $1 billion a year. They're fine. You've got AEW, which is a legitimate competition to WWE, and that they're not going anywhere anytime soon, and they're signing the likes of CM Punk, Bryan Danielson. They've got Kenny Omega there. They've got the Young Bucks. They've got a great roster of talent, a huge roster of talent. You've got a company like GCW, which is, I would guess, the modern-day equivalent of ECW, and got the rabid, hardcore following, but also a great in-ring product as well, and they deliver great shows, and they're, always trending. They're always doing great stuff. And yet you've also still got territories and promotions like Impact Wrestling as well that are delivering great content. They've got fans. They've got, these fun events, and they've got real good stuff. And I think this past weekend was just another example of a really great event, and I certainly enjoyed it. My biggest regret is that we couldn't do that live stream, but it is what it is. These things happen. Anyway, let's get into some of the big moments that happened at the show. One being Eddie Edwards, the heart and soul of Impact Wrestling, as he's known, the former Impact Wrestling World Champion, the guy that's pledged himself to be Impact Wrestling for life, turned his back on Impact Wrestling. How could he? The ultimate babyface is now heel. Now, the main event of this past weekend's Impact Wrestling No Surrender event saw Honor No More, which of course is Matt Taven, Mike Bennett, PCO, Vincent, and Kenny King, defeat Team Impact, which consisted of Chris Sabin, Willie Mack, Rhino, Rich Swann, and Steve Macklin, to earn contracts with the company. But the faction didn't achieve the victory without a little help from Impact Wrestling veteran Eddie Edwards, who betrayed his teammates and Impact Wrestling by attacking Rhino. It looks like Eddie Edwards will be a major player in the Honor No More stable going forward. Now, we don't know if he's going to be the leader or anything like that. Of course, Eddie Edwards got a huge history with Ring of Honor, as do many of the Impact Wrestling roster, as do really most of the entire pro wrestling business. There's a time now which they're doing this Ring of Honor Hall of Fame, and it's got the likes of CM Punk was just announced today, but Bryan Danielson, Samoa Joe, etc. And there are plenty of people that have a connection to Ring of Honor. Look, the American Wolves have a huge connection to it as well. It's kind of, I guess, a bit of a swerve. Impact Wrestling over the course of the last few months has certainly enjoyed a swerve. They tend to throw that quite a lot, whether it's Moose cashing in the Call Your Shot Gauntlet to win the World Championship, whether it's now Eddie Edwards turning his back on Impact Wrestling, and I would assume being the leader of this Honor No More faction. It's going to be interesting to see certainly where they go with that. Now, I do know, and again, this is a bit of a spoiler, but we'll talk about this tomorrow, that he's going to explain his actions at the upcoming set of television tapings. It'll be interesting to see who is the guy representing Impact Wrestling to kind of go up against them. Of course, as I mentioned, we had this team of Chris Sabin, Willie Mack, Rhino, Rich Swann, Steve Macklin. That faced Honor No More at the at No Surrender. But I look at those names, and maybe Chris Sabin might be the one that's, Impact Wrestling through and through. Of course, got a huge issue with the company. But I look at this storyline and I say to myself, if Josh Alexander does re-sign with the company, if Josh Alexander does come back, and obviously if he re-signs, he's going to get his work visa back as well, then maybe he'll be the guy that, flies the flag, shall we say, for Impact Wrestling and goes up against Honor No More. We don't know. But I am interested to see where it goes going forward. I think it makes sense for Honor No More, obviously, to win the match. You don't want to have a Nexus situation or anything like that, right? Because we've seen in the past when it comes to these big factions, these outside factions, invading factions, they have to win. They have to be seen as a credible threat. It happened with the Nexus, whereby they were this outside invading credible threat, and the first big match realistically they had, which was the Nexus versus Team WWE at SummerSlam in 2010, they lost. And how can you be a threat if you lose your match? And it kind of happened to Aces and Eights when it comes to Impact Wrestling as well. Aces and Eights was this outside invading faction, but after a while, they kept losing so many matches that they didn't seem credible. They didn't seem much of a threat. To build up any kind of faction to be threatening to a company whenever they do this sort of invasion kind of angle, they need to win. It was the same with the WCW invasion. For a while, they didn't win. They had the win at Invasion, which was big, and then after that, all they did was lose, and you can't be threatening if you're constantly losing. But also, from a storyline perspective as well, is they had to win because you have to explain why they're constantly on the program. You have to constantly explain why and how they're getting into the arenas every week. And they've managed to play that off relatively well on Impact Wrestling television, but eventually people start to ask the question, why are these guys even on the program? Why are these guys even in the Impact Wrestling arena when they're not actually supposed to be there? They're invading every single week. Why wouldn't you just beef up your security? Now, they've explained that now they've won the match. It's kind of a case of, well, they've earned their contracts, they're allowed to be here, and the storyline continues going forward. Now, it'll be interesting to see how they explain it, or how Eddie Edwards explains his defection, his betrayal on these upcoming episodes of Impact Wrestling, whether or not he reveals himself to be the person that's invited all of these ROH guys to Impact Wrestling, if he saw what was going on in Ring of Honor and decided he needed to bring these people in to reshape and remold Impact Wrestling in his own image. He's been in Impact Wrestling for so long. He's been the heart and soul of Impact Wrestling, and he's seen that despite being the heart and soul of the company, this company's is rotten from within, and he has to reshape it in his image, and he has to burn it down and then build it back up. Maybe it's kind of that kind of thing. Maybe he's kind of going to go, and I don't even really like to use this example, but kind of a Seth Rollins approach when he was, the Monday Night Messiah or all that kind of stuff. Maybe he has to go down that route, and that's what he's trying to do, because he cares so much about Impact Wrestling, he has to do the difficult things and the difficult choices. Or maybe he's just completely disillusioned with the company, and because of that, he feels like he needs to get rid of it. Something like that. I don't know. It'd be interesting, or to see maybe that he thinks that Impact Wrestling has no more honor or something like that. So it'd be interesting to see that. And again, it was a swerve that certainly I didn't see coming, so I'm interested to see where that one goes going forward. It wasn't the only betrayal, though, because Jay White turned on the GOD, the Gorillas of Destiny, members of the Bullet Club at Impact Wrestling No Surrender. It looks as though the Gorillas of Destiny, Tama Tonga and Tangaloa, have been kicked out of the Bullet Club based on what transpired at Impact Wrestling No Surrender. Now, before we get into what happened, how significant is it? We talk about this relationship with New Japan and Impact Wrestling, that New Japan's biggest ever faction, and that's what it is. Bullet Club is New Japan's, is still their biggest faction, but certainly their biggest ever faction, the biggest money-making faction they've ever had in that company, if you look at merchandise and all that kind of stuff. And people can talk about it being stale and outdated. That's fair. It's been going on since, 2013, 2012, how long? It's been nearly a decade. But despite that, they had two really significant founding members kicked out of the club, not on a New Japan pro wrestling program, not even in Japan, not on New Japan Strong. They had them kicked out at an Impact Wrestling event, an Impact Plus event. That's really significant when it comes to the relationship, and that just goes to show how strong that relationship between Impact Wrestling and New Japan is right now when it comes to the airing on Access TV, etc. And it goes to show how much more Bullet Club crossover we're going to see in Impact Wrestling going forward. It's really significant. So during the show, the GOD took on the Good Brothers, Anderson and Gallows, in an attempt to become the Impact Wrestling World Tag Team Champions. However, they instead got ambushed by someone they thought was their ally, that being Jay White. Now, White dropped lower with the Blade Runner finishing move, allowing the Good Brothers to pick up the victory and retain the championships. After the match was finished, White and Bay did a two sweets with the Good Brothers, seemingly bringing them back into the group. Now, White has been featured in numerous promotions recently, making his AEW debut less than a couple of weeks ago. He was victorious in his first match and looks to be bringing more stories surrounding the Bullet Club into All Elite Wrestling also. So it'll be interesting to see if Anderson and Gallows follow Jay White to AEW in that feud with the Elite and seemingly Kenny Omega whenever Kenny Omega does return, and Adam Cole and all that kind of stuff. My only kind of thing that I think slightly odd is that the storyline going into No Surrender was that the Good Brothers had aligned themselves with Violent by Design, right? They aligned themselves with Violent by Design, but now they're back in Bullet Club. So are Violent by Design going to be pissed with that? I don't know, but it's significant with Anderson and Gallows being in there. It's definitely Carl Anderson, because not only was he a founding member, but also he was a former leader. So the Bullet Club now has 3 members of Impact Wrestling in there, which is very significant. They kicked out, founding members, and they've brought back in a founding member too. And it'll be interesting to see if someone like Carl Anderson is going to be involved in this Bullet Club influence in AEW and New Japan as well. Obviously, we know that Anderson and Gallows have been involved in the New Japan Pro Wrestling program over the course of the last few months, and I think their influence will grow bigger. Of course, when they signed with Impact Wrestling back in 2020, part of the deal in their contract was that they were going to split their time between Impact Wrestling and New Japan. Now, Impact Wrestling was going to have priority on their dates, but also they said, but when things start to open back up, we're going to be doing a lot of tours in Japan. Things still really haven't opened up that much that flying back and forth's easy and doable. But maybe this is we're looking at a situation also where the Good Brothers contract with Impact Wrestling expires later this year. And maybe this is sort of the beginning of them moving more towards appearing more in New Japan as opposed to appearing in Impact Wrestling. I don't know. Or maybe it's going to be them going back to AEW with Jay White. Maybe bringing Chris Bay with them also. So we could see more crossover between Impact Wrestling and AEW. We could see more crossover between, Impact and New Japan, or AEW New Japan. This forbidden door is just going like this at this point. And speaking of, a turn or betrayal rather that I didn't see coming, that was this one. But I suppose in retrospect, we probably should have, right? Because we saw it that Tama Tonga had put on social media that his contract with New Japan has expired and he was a free agent, even saying to Tony Khan, I want to walk through that forbidden door. And maybe this is also an indication that Tama Tonga hasn't re-signed with New Japan. He doesn't intend to, and he's left the company. What happens when you leave the company and you're in the Bullet Club? You get kicked out. And maybe that's what's happened to him. Finally, I want to talk about the number one contender for the X Division Championship, that being Jake Something, because a new number one contender for the X Division Championship was determined at No Surrender this past weekend. Jake Something came out the victor in a quick-paced fatal four-way match where he defeated Ace Austin, Chris Bay, and Speedball Mike Bailey. Now, that must be said, I was slightly surprised with this one. I thought Chris Bay might win it because I just like the idea of Chris Bay, Trey Miguel. I think just do that match to death. I'm a big fan of it. But Jake Something is now the number one contender for the X Division Championship. Now, of course, Trey Miguel did face... who was it? He was in a kickoff match at the beginning of the show. My mind's blanking on that one. But that's an interesting match, and it looks like Impact Wrestling is continuing with this idea that the X Division... I mean, so many people over the years have said, oh, what is the X Division? It's not about weight limits, no limits, etc. But I think over the course of maybe the last 18 months, Impact Wrestling has really nailed down that it's their version of, say, a television championship, an intercontinental championship, whatever you want to call it. Yes, it features high-flying matches. Yes, it features different styles from around the world. But it's their secondary championship. That's what you saw where the likes of Josh Alexander was a champion. They treated it very much as like a television championship or a mid-card championship to elevate someone to the next level. Currently, Trey Miguel has it, and he's more of a, shall we say, traditional X Division champion. But Jake Something's an interesting one. I mean, Jake Something's contract with Impact Wrestling isn't long before it expires. It'll be interesting to see if he's decided to stick around. If he wins the X Division championship, would indicate that he's probably going to stick around for a while, and he signed a new deal. If maybe this could be his final feud before he does leave the company, we'll have to wait and see. But overall, as I mentioned, guys, really enjoyed Impact Wrestling No Surrender, and as I mentioned, when it comes to the post-show television tapings that have happened over the course of the last few days, we will speak about that over the course of the next few days here on the channel, so do be sure to subscribe, bottom right hand corner, smash a like on the video, and let me know your thoughts about No Surrender in the comment section below, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.